Good afternoon. I call to order the March 18th, 2025 regular meeting of the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission. For the record, my name is Marie Bjornberg and I serve as chair of the commission. Just a reminder to silence your cell phones and other electronic devices and to speak clearly into the microphone when speaking at the dais or giving testimony. Would the clerk please call the roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum?
Councilmember Alexander.
Present.
Booty.
Present.
Hare.
Present.
Carato is absent. Melblom.
Present.
Thomas.
Present.
Wallace.
Present.
Rodriguez is absent. Vice Chair Maston.
Present.
Chair Bjornberg.
Present.
There are 8 members present.
Let the record reflect that we do have quorum and that Commissioner Rodriguez provided proper notice that they have a conflict this afternoon and their absence is excused. Our first order of business is to adopt the agenda for this meeting. We will work from the agendas that are available by the clerk. I will go through and sort out which items will be discussed and which items will be put on the consent agenda to be approved as recommended by staff and without further discussion. Item number 4 is 4724 Emerson Avenue South, Ward 13. This application is for a certificate of appropriateness and will be on consent unless someone wants to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation. Item number 5 is 200 3rd Avenue North, Ward 3. This application is for a certificate of appropriateness, and item number 5 will be on consent unless someone wants to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendation. Item number 6 is Chapter 599, Ordinance Revisions, Second Draft, all wards. Item number 6 will be discussed. So the proposed agenda is, the consent agenda will include item number 4, 4724 Emerson Avenue South, Ward 13, and item number 5, 200 3rd Avenue North, Ward 3. Is there any opposition from commissioners to the staff recommendations for these items? Is there anyone in the public that wishes to speak in opposition to these items? Hearing no opposition to placing these items on consent, we will approve these consent items in one motion at the start of the meeting. The following item will have staff presentation and commission discussion without a public hearing. Item number 6, Chapter 599, Ordinance Revisions, Second Draft, all wards. Commissioners, may I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Maston so moves.
Thank you, Commissioner Maston. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, Commissioner Wallace. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Any abstentions? The agenda is approved. Our next order of business will be to approve the minutes from our March 4th, 2025 meeting. May I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Melblom moves to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Melblom. Is there a second?
Hare seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner Hare. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed say nay. Any abstentions? The minutes are approved. Before I open the hearing to public comments, let me summarize the process for conducting the public hearing. First, we will act on the consent agenda we just set. Once items on the consent agenda are approved, the commission is done with those items and applicants may contact planning staff tomorrow about next steps. After the consent agenda is approved, we will take the remaining agenda item. Planning staff will present its report and commissioners may ask questions of staff. I'll now open the public hearing on the consent agenda items. Item number 4, 4724 Emerson Avenue South, Ward 13, and item number 5, 200 3rd Avenue North, Ward 3. Again, do commissioners oppose the staff recommendation for these items? Are there any members of the public who oppose staff recommendations for these items? Seeing none, I will now close the public hearing on the consent agenda items. May I have a motion to approve staff findings and recommendations for these items?
Alexander moves.
Thank you, Commissioner Alexander. Is there a second?
Melblom seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner Melblom. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Any abstentions? These items are approved as recommended by staff on the agenda. Applicants may contact planning staff about next steps. Our next item is item number 6, Chapter 599 Ordinance Revisions, second draft, all wards. The staff memo is presented by Rob Skolecki.
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg, and good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Rob Skolecki. I'm a Senior City Planner in the Historic Preservation section of CPED, and today I am bringing forward what we are calling the second draft of Chapter 599. The first one that we might refer to was the one that Commissioners had the chance to review back in October of last year. But since that point, staff have been able to make a lot of changes based on your feedback and feedback from other stakeholders. So we're excited to bring another draft forward to you today for your comments. And of course, you've all had time to review that through the attachment and the staff memo. I just want to give a brief background just to kind of reiterate how we got to this point of rewriting the ordinance here. As you all know, in 1972, the city adopted the Local Historic Preservation Ordinance to encourage the study and designation protection of properties that are significant to the city's built environment and cultural heritage. So over the past, over 50 years, we've been able to designate 20 historic districts and over 195 individual landmarks through a program related to the preservation ordinance. So since the early 70s, we've had some version of a local preservation ordinance in local law. Our program is a certified local government, so we're a municipality that's demonstrated a commitment to preserving local history, and we have certain requirements through the certified local government manual that we have to adhere to when looking at how we write our ordinance and what standards we abide by. And as you are all aware, probably after saying this many times over the past year, it's Title 23, Chapter 599, the local heritage preservation. It's local preservation ordinance, and that's what administers our preservation program. That's what allows for the HPC to operate as it does. And Chapter 599 was not comprehensively updated since 2001. So there have been minor changes, since that time, but not completely looked at, and changes looked at since 2001. So since 2001, as we are all aware, practices and processes in historic preservation have changed. So all of Chapter 599 as part of this project is proposed to be repealed and replaced in its entirety. So there's some articles that you have already seen that remain pretty similar, if not almost exactly the same to what's written, maybe with some minor revisions, and some sections that have been completely reorganized and rewritten here. So our staff memo that was sent out for your review details a lot of different reasons that we were proposing different amendments, and also highlights areas that were initially identified for changes when we were thinking of rewriting the text. As I mentioned earlier, so on October 22nd, 2024, CPED staff brought this first draft of Chapter 599 to you all at HPC for your comments. So a lot of your comments were used in formulating changes. We did include in the memo, as you saw, basically the same kind of draft that you were presented with in October. although there's some areas with strike-throughs, and those areas are locations that have since changed. So whatever staff had brought to you before, parts of that have changed, and we do note that in our notes on pages below in the memo. So we've also addressed these other changes, both, again, through stakeholder comments from HPC commissioners, as well as just other planning staff, the city attorney's office, a handful of external preservation stakeholders. So the changes that were made to the document since October were outlined in the staff memo, and they do include the following items. So the first one, and I think the largest scale change, at least that we have been working on a lot recently, is that administrative preservation applications are no longer proposed to be divided into 2 applications. So that was a larger change that we had brought forward initially in October to divide what is currently 1 administrative preservation application, a certificate of no change, into 2 applications, one that would function very similarly to a certificate of no change, and one that would be a bit of a higher tier and would require a fee, and for larger scale projects that have a greater chance of affecting historic materials. So that is what was brought forward to you in October. Since then, staff, with a lot of internal consultation with the city attorney's office and other planning staff, have realized that the best route to go forward here is going to be one administrative application, but allowing staff the ability to review changes just within permit review. So many changes that are currently reviewed through a certificate of no change will now only require permit review. So there's not going to be a separate preservation application needed for kind of that lowest tier of projects that we would normally review through a certificate of no change. So this follows along with how a lot of other sections of CPED do review building permits to comply with, for example, zoning code or building code, depending on the staff. So this new process has been thought of to try to reduce administrative processing times, both for applicants and for staff. And hopefully to allow for the projects that will have those greater impacts on, potential greater impacts, I should say, on historic properties, to still have an administrative review. So we're keeping 1 administrative application, we're keeping that having a fee, so essentially that is going to take place of the administrative preservation application 2 that you all saw in October. But then, instead of having an administrative preservation application 1, there would be no application associated with that, and it would just be staff's permit review there. So another item that I know commissioners commented on last time we brought this forward is just that at the time we thought of the names Administrative Preservation Application 1 and Administrative Preservation Application 2 to name those applications. I think there were some comments at that time, maybe unsure if those were the best names, so we are requesting again that, if you have comments on the names as they're currently written, Administrative Preservation Application and Commission Preservation Application, we'd be happy to hear your thoughts on that. The second change that we noted in the memo is that the historic variance tool is actually being renamed to a historic exception. And this is really in order to differentiate this tool, the historic variance, as we've known it for decades now, from a zoning variance. So the zoning term variance has a very strict definition, and there are possible legal issues that come with that term being applied to how it's used for a historic variance as we currently understand it. So the guidance there was that we can, keep the tool as it exists, so allow the variance to still be used as we currently understand it to be, but it would have this different name, which is the historic exception. The third item is that the findings and consistency with the comprehensive plan have been added back in for administrative and commission preservation applications. So that had been initially taken out to try to streamline findings. But again, with discussion internally, we realized that it's important to have those back in. So those are placed back in the findings for the administrative and commission applications. And the fourth one here is that sections of code have been removed where language is obsolete or altered or outdated. So that's very similar to kind of the cleaning up that we did in the previous draft, but there were a few areas that were noted by the city attorney's office and maybe other staff that could be changed to be more in line with, current language, as well as more in line with zoning language where applicable, just to be up to date and consistent where needed. The fifth item, so staff expanded and clarified findings for the application for demolition of designated property. So we have added language and clarified that a property, how a property could be denied and studied for individual landmark status in certain situations that may come up. So this may occur if, we have a property that is planned for demolition within an already designated historic district. So the example we thought of is, St. Anthony Falls Historic District is very large. It includes a lot of non-contributing resources, but some of those non-contributing resources could be recognized, for example, a modern or postmodern significance, which wouldn't be captured under the current period of significance for the district. So we added the ability for the HPC to potentially study for individual landmark status properties like that are already designated but may be recognized for a different significance where they could be eligible for individual landmark status. The sixth one here is that we added text to clarify the demolition of a designated property application, that is the one that is needed to authorize the demolition of a property that is under interim protection. So when properties are under interim protection and being studied, if a property owner would want to, propose a demolition of that, we clarified that it would be the demolition of designated property application that would be submitted at that point. So that was just kind of tying up an area that it was an uncertainty of, which application would be submitted in that situation. And the last two items here, I believe. So the seventh item is keeping districts designated by state law and in the definition of historic district. So that falls back on one of the items we brought forward in October as something we were actually going to remove. So the only district this applies to is Victory Memorial Drive. That is a state district that we had been reviewing alterations to and making evaluation to design changes to through administrative processes. We do still have that ability, and that was kind of a long discussion on whether or not we wanted to keep that in there. Ultimately, the consensus was that we would keep that section in the historic district definition so that districts under state law could still be regulated. And then for the eighth point, so we added text for amendments and designations. And, within designation amendments, this is something that our team has been talking a lot about internally. So as written in the current draft of 599, we do detail for changes to periods of significance, contributing and non-contributing resources, and criteria of significance, what routes each of those have to go through in order to have those items, formally changed or adopted within a designation. So with that, staff is seeking kind of final feedback from the Heritage Preservation Commission on the formatting and content of this second draft. We did actually send the same draft that you received to the city attorney's office on Friday. We got comments back yesterday noting that they were okay essentially with everything that the changes were made. So we didn't receive any concerns from the attorney's office on that. And following your comments today, the next step would be having our team send a draft to the clerk's office to make sure that they can have the final say with formatting, make sure they can read through it, make sure it makes sense, and receive any feedback from them as well. And then the final draft would come back to you, HPC, with a staff recommendation on adoption. So that would be something that you would vote on, and eventually from that point, it would go all the way up through the council process and eventually be signed by the mayor and published. And that is TBD. We're not exactly sure when we can get that on a public hearing schedule for HPC. But we're hoping, sometime this summer, if not, late spring, depending on where it goes. So with that, a few things to mention. I know we had a specific question back here for commissioners, if you want to weigh in on that first. Also, we did get comments from Commissioner Rodriguez, who is absent currently, just a few points that could be discussed as well. So with that, we as staff are open for any questions, but happy and I guess excited to hear your comments as well on this second draft. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Commissioners, are there questions for staff? Commissioner Melblom.
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg. I have a bunch of questions, so sorry if everybody gets stuck now behind me. That's why I sat quietly. Mr. Skulecki, do you have the document that was sent to us that you could put up so that we could kind of see what I'm referring to? It was the memorandum that you sent dated March 18th to the HPC about the second draft for review and comment.
Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Melblom, unfortunately, I don't have that right now to bring up directly on the screen. I do have it in front of me, though, to reference, and I'm sure many commissioners do as well.
Okay. So on page 3, item 6, you referred to removing sections of code that are rarely or no longer utilized, in particular transfer of development rights in conservation districts, which seems like that makes sense. If they haven't been used, why are they in there? But I was wondering if you've gotten any feedback or pushback on removing them from anybody.
Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Melblom, thank you for that question, and that is actually something that we had discussed a lot internally for more so the conservation district item. So I think, we understand that that was an initiative that was developed over 10 years ago now, and at the time it was a pretty large undertaking to kind of devise this new tool. So we understand that removing it, it's not something we took lightly. It was a lot of discussions that we brought in. Ultimately, and I believe we may have talked about this in the past too, about kind of staff's reasoning for this. A conservation district has not been adopted in the decade that it has been a tool. In addition to that, the tool is very difficult for members of the public to kind of grasp and understand, as well as staff as well. So to designate a conservation district and then to develop, guidelines for that and rules for that conservation district, it is a very challenging task. Mm-hmm. And, in the end,
I don't mean to interrupt. I agree with you. Like both of these, as an architect, having looked at them, they're both really complicated. Mm-hmm. So my question was just, have you gotten feedback from anybody that has said, don't get rid of that? Or is basically the world been mute on this?
Sure. And, initially I think we had some pushback, but in discussions, that's where kind of our reasoning was discussed, and I think eventually there really wasn't a whole lot of final pushback on getting rid of these tools, but if commissioners think otherwise or have kind of other comments that they want to provide, we'd be happy to hear those.
Okay, thank you. No, it makes sense for me to get rid of something that people aren't using, that it feels overly complicated. On page 4, item C, number 2, it says the requirement to be a potential historic resource does not apply to council members or the mayor who may directly submit a nomination to CPED staff. Why is that? Why do they have a different mechanism than Joe Citizen?
Chair Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Melblom, I think that's another question that we discussed at length internally. I think, be happy to hear from other staff on their interpretation of this, but, if we do have elected officials seeking nomination, I think the fact that they are elected officials kind of makes them, the speaker on behalf of their constituents for that. And, that is something that we had discussed kind of at length. Is this the correct way to go? And ultimately, we thought it still provides for, plenty of opportunity for someone to receive that potential historic resource determination, if they're not an elected official. So we believe that there are situations where it will be, an equitable approach between who is able to submit a nomination here.
I'll just, go ahead.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that same item, or do you want to ask?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Can you just remind me, so is there a reason that HPC members are not included in that?
I think, and you'll have to forgive me as well. So, with all these drafts that we've been going through, I'm trying to remember, at what point. So
I'm going through the same process, and that's why.
Yeah. So this one, I think, if
like,
Andrea Burke wants to field this one, that'd be great.
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg. Sorry, I'm going to use the Kleenex. I think my little red flag is missing, but that's fine. You know what I mean. Andrea Burke, supervisor for the team. Yes, I can answer that question. So if I'm hearing Commissioner Melblom correctly, the question was regarding the PHR, or a potential historic resource determined prior to nomination, and why are council members and the mayor excluded from that versus the other folks that are listed on the list that have to receive that determination first before being able to submit a nomination. It was recommended internally by other members of staff to, similar to what Rob had said, because they are the elected official, to give them the greatest ease of opportunity to be able to, I would say, fast track an item based on constituent interest or political interest, and to remove that pre-step for elected officials, but not for the HPC or for the public. So that was more or less the reasoning behind it, but it was intentional being put in there. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner
Do you
Melblom.
mind if I just ask one follow-up to that? In order to demonstrate that they're meeting the threshold for the fast tracking, is there a requirement that they prove that it's a constituent-led request, or is it more up to their discretion as elected officials?
Chair Bjornberg and Commissioner Wallace, it is at their discretion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Melblom.
Yeah, and so based on the conversation you just heard, I would say I am completely opposed to it. I think that the elected officials already have a very large podium to be able to influence things, and this just gives them a slightly larger podium. And frankly, if it's all that important, I don't see any reason why they can't marshal their resources to be able to get people to do this. Not wanting to get overly political, but watching what's happening in the nation's capital, it makes me question the ability to abuse processes, and I could easily see somebody submitting a whole bunch of these because it's actually very easy for them to do something and gumming up the process. So it feels like having one set of rules that applies to everybody is actually a better process, I think, for us to be under. And then in that same section C, item 5, it says the interim protection timeline was increased to 16 months, but there's an option to extend it longer. Interim protection for potential landmarks still covers review of exterior alterations, but in potential historic districts, only demolition is reviewed. So how does this intersect with the already studied but not yet designated properties that sit on the HBC ledger? As you know, this is like a this is like the branch I'm going to keep beating everybody with. None of those, and maybe I'm getting the terminology incorrect here, but all of those properties that were looked at decades ago or districts that were looked at decades ago still are in this, what I think of as limbo. They haven't been adjudicated to say, yes, they're historic or they're not. So I believe that they are all subject to these interim protections. And so would this be retroactively applied to all of those as a way to flush them out of the system?
Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Melblom, maybe I might need clarification on your question or your request. I think from our point of view, the process of having a more clear and codified way of determining what a potential historic resource is helping to take away any of that, uncertainty that there has been in the past. So as far as how that applies to the interim protection timeline, interim protection is only placed on properties if they are brought forward for nomination and if that nomination is approved. So I think to go back to the previous point, when we do have a system now in place to formally determine potential historic resources, and that is going to be a requirement for property owners to submit that in order to nominate a property. That is already another layer of more certainty for property owners. So it kind of does take away some of these situations where property owners may have been unaware. So that is my response. If that's not where your question was heading, I'd be happy to.
No, it does, because I think what I was doing was mixing up interim and potential. Mm-hmm. So that seems to be the difference there. So thank you. I appreciate that. Sorry. On page 5, number 7, which is at the bottom of the page, it says keeping districts designated by state law in the definition of, quote, historic district, unquote, thus keeping these under review of local registration. This only currently includes Victory Memorial Drive. And I didn't quite understand what that means. I know you just spoke about it, but I still don't understand what that means. And I thought that we were going to remove this. I thought that previously you all said that you were going to remove this because our review of something like, let's say, Victory Memorial Drive is really a duplication of effort because the state already will control what happens and in theory should, I would assume, do a good job.
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg and Commissioner Melblom. I think this is what I might defer to Andrea Burke on as well, because I know Andrea's kind of had more conversations at the state level with that too.
Thanks, Rob. Yes, Chair Bjornberg and Commissioner Melblom, to address your question, you are correct. We did previously propose removing this out of the definition so that a local historic district did not include a state historic district. But through discussions and actually through some of the comments at the previous meeting at HPC, there was a comment made that there is some bit of a loophole for state historic districts regarding a level of review. And so we looked a little further into that, and that is correct. State historic districts aren't really captured under any particular specifically mandated review. And so it was, and that very well could have been the intention for why it was included in the ordinance. I don't know for sure. But after identifying that, felt that it was reasonable to include it and keep it because it has been here since 2003. So instead of removing it and allowing somebody to come and bring it through the local designation process, would rather just keep it and continue doing as we have been, because there is unfortunately no method. It's not captured under Section 106. It's not captured under, specifically, I believe, a Chapter 138. So this does give some measure of a oversight to that by the locality, in this case, the city of Minneapolis. So, thanks.
Okay, thank you. That makes a lot of sense.
I'm just also going to add, I actually appreciate the change that it is added back in, because it absolutely is a loophole that I believe just sets up that there can be enforcement of something on that. So I realize it's a little bit of a weird thing, but appreciate that it's back in. Commissioner Melblom.
Thank you. On page 8 of the PDF, which is page 1 of the ordinance, at the bottom, 599.50B, emergency exception. If you go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines, the sentence starts with however. So it says, however, only such work that is necessary to correct the unsafe or dangerous condition may be performed. The extent of such work shall be determined in consultation with the planning director, who may recommend to the building official that salvage and preservation, blah, 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 blah. So I'm wondering if we need to be more explicit there and insert, so the sentence, that second sentence would read, the extent of such work shall be determined in consultation with the planning director prior to the work being enacted, or prior to the work being commenced or started, whatever word you want to use, who may recommend to the building official that salvage or preservation. Because it doesn't really explicitly say that you have to get this permission for, and I'm just thinking of enforcement and the fact that we had today before us, we approved in unanimous consent example of somebody doing something without consulting yourself and the other staff members before they made a change to something. So that was my recommendation, that we put in that wording in there. If you believe it's superfluous, that's fine, or maybe it's covered somewhere else. I didn't feel that it was.
Thank you, Commissioner Melblom. That's something we can look at. We want to make sure, too, that any language that we're using that might mirror zoning code might be consistent with that, so we would have to check if that is in other areas of text. But understand your comments, especially given the applications today.
Okay. On page 9 of the PDF, under section 599.130, number 2. I think this is more just a question of what do we have, but it says, to hear and make recommendations of the City Council on the adoption and revision of design guidelines for landmarks in historic districts. Do we actually have design guidelines for landmarks? I know we do for districts.
Commissioner Melblom, that's a great question. We do. There are a handful of landmarks that do have design guidelines.
Okay.
They're very, I would say, relatively uncommon, considering we have, close to 200 landmarks, and I don't know, maybe 20 of them have individual design guidelines. I may be wrong on that number, but that's just to illustrate it. It's a rather small amount.
Okay, thank you. It was more of a clarification and probably education on my part. On page 10 at the top, D, commission membership. So the second sentence is, members shall be persons with demonstrated interest, knowledge, ability, or expertise in historic preservation, neighborhood revitalization, archaeology, urban planning, history, or architecture. And I'm wondering why we don't have landscape architecture and planning as examples there. I'm just thinking of Commissioner Corrado, I think, would likely be able to speak about anything about a historic landscape much better than probably most of us. So it seems like that would be a nice thing to add. And then I was thinking of also planning, because I think there are historic planners, and they do look at the world differently than architects do, certainly, in a good way. That wasn't trying to make a slight. Okay, then I jumped ahead to page 17. which is page 11 of the ordinance. And it's section 599.320. So this is the potential historic resource requirement. So this is kind of revisiting when I was, I think, a little confused earlier about interim versus potential. So if it says only properties which have been previously determined to be potential historic resources pursuant to Article 5, potential historic resources may be nominated for historic designation. Nominations for historic designation submitted for properties which have not been previously determined shall be invalid. So there exist all these potential historic resource requirements, and I believe that I'm using the right terminology now. But there's no way to dispose of them when there's not an incomplete process, because there's neither the time nor the money to be able to have a bunch of people study these things. So is there any appetite to add some sort of time limit to the status as a potential historic resource, that if it's not advanced, if there's no decision made by default after 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever seems logical, that no longer is considered a potential historic resource? And that would be a way to move off the books all of these potential historic resources that are just sitting out there. Was that ever considered, or do you think that's a good idea? Kind of two questions.
Thank you for your comments, Commissioner Melblom. I'm just looking through text right now. So if you give me maybe a minute to look at that. I don't know if Andrea Burke heard anything in that question that she might want to answer with right away.
Thank you, Commissioner Melblom, and I'm sorry, Chair Bjornberg and Commissioner Melblom. Yes, I can answer this right away. We did heavily discuss and actually had in a very early draft of this a 10-year sunset date for potential historic resources, and that was what made it through several rounds of review. I'll just put it that way. It came time at a certain part of decision-making internally, and it was voted down to keep that 10-year sunset on there. But that was an initial idea from the start to address essentially what you had mentioned. But internally, there was consensus to take it off and have it exist, I would say, more or less, indefinitely, and of course, until there is demolition, and that demolition is approved. But, as the big part of this particular article, which I think you're well aware of, is that it's elevating the status of potential historic resources to bring more awareness and transparency to this kind of pre-step before nomination or demolition of a potential historic resource. But in the end, there is no sunset at this point in time. Thanks.
Do you know why what the rationale for not including that was? Because to me, it seems like a logical thing to do. If it was actually a historic resource, one would think that somebody would actually take action on it. Over 2 years that I've been on the commission, I believe we designated 2, maybe 3 historic resources in that time. So it's not as if there's a lack of focus to do this. So I think something that's been sitting there for 20 or 30 years probably isn't really actually historic. So it feels like it's an artificial, to me personally, it feels like it's an artificial designation that is unsupportable. And if it really is supportable, somebody should actually do something with it. That's personal opinion.
Yeah, Commissioner Melblom, thanks for your opinion on that. From what I remember, the argument was that if we, after 10 years, this fell off that list, and then somebody, let's say in the next 2 weeks or 2 years, wanted to come back and start the process over, we would likely reach the same conclusion unless it had been demolished or significantly altered. And the chances of that likely happening are high, in the fact that we would likely reach the same conclusion that it's still eligible but that the alterations didn't take it to a level where it wouldn't be eligible. I mean, there's always going to be cases, but I believe that was the rationale for removing it internally.
Okay.
Thank
I'd
you.
just like to go on the record saying I think that there should be a sunset date. And 10 years seems like it's more than adequate time to adjudicate something. But that's, again, personal opinion.
Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment on this. I definitely am in support of not having a sunset, particularly because there are many buildings that stand vacant for many years. They're not being touched, but then at some point some developer may come along who wants to revitalize that building, and having those extra incentives that they can restore this building, it's easier to get it as a landmark or designated, gives them more incentives to then restore that building versus demolish it. And I just, having worked in an area where a lot of developers take many years to put deals together, I feel like sunsetting it would prevent some buildings from getting that designation that deserve it.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Does anybody else have comments on that specific item? Commissioner Wallace.
Just a question, and might be a question for the future, but given that there isn't a sunset date, will there be any activity to basically publicize what, similar to how we have maps of the local landmarks and that sort of thing? Is there any effort or intention to make an effort around mapping those so the public can see where those potential historic resources are? Just thinking if they are under the same kind of purview as the formerly landmarked properties, if you're looking for a house, if you're buying X, Y, and Z property, having those kind of resources immediately available could be really helpful. Just a thought, but wondered if that was something that might come down the road potentially.
Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Wallace, I think staff has discussed that as, possibly a goal in the future. To do that would take a lot of staff time and likely funding. We do currently have an internal map. It is not incredibly accurate, but it does mark, the past survey dates going back to the 2000s era reconnaissance survey of the city. So I think we've discussed it, but we haven't, unless I'm incorrect on that, we haven't made a determination of that being an initiative that would for certain go forward in the future.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Andrea Burke.
Chair Bjornberg and Commissioner Wallace, sorry, Rob, just a slight clarification to Rob's statement. It is an initiative, probably one that's not going to be realized in 2025, but with the idea to create this, elevate the status of potential historic resources, the justification was to provide more transparency for the public, and really the most reasonable way to do that is through an online map. But Rob is correct. It will take a lot of staff time and coordination, and so yes, it's not a 2025 work plan item, but we have started some initial conversations to see what this may look like and what the work will be involved. So to answer your question, yes, just not at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. No, that makes sense. Thank you both for responding.
Other questions or comments around that?
I think
Commissioner Matsson.
I'm sorry, jumping the gun here. I just would like to, I think, reinstate what I'm hearing from this end, that I think there's reasons to not sunset, and anything we can do to bring transparency to that list of properties, just to make it more accessible to the citizens who may be purchasing a property that they will later find out is on this list of potential resources, would probably be helpful. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Other comments or questions?
I think I only have one more.
Commissioner Melblom.
On page 20 of the PDF, which is page 14 of the ordinance, under section 599.440D, the removing a landmark from designation. So basically there is the only way to remove it is if it's a danger or it's destroyed by fire, which is what I read. Should there be some method, a very high bar, to remove a designation? So what I'm thinking of is in some communities, not ours, there were Civil War heroes that were, with all the statues being taken down. Had any of those been designated, those probably would not have been able to be taken down. I can't think of any practical thing in our community that this would warrant, but that's why I'm wondering, have you ever considered there being more of a mechanism to do this, or more raised, but with a very, very high bar to being able to do this?
Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Melblom, thank you for the comment. That is another thing that I think our team discussed a little bit internally. Ultimately, we wanted to be very clear about in which situations we thought landmark status could be removable. I mean, currently, we actually don't have it in our ordinance of how to remove landmark status. We do have landmarks that have been demolished or removed where technically the parcel is still designated, and we don't know exactly, what the procedure is there for proceeding. So we really looked to the Certified Local Government Manual to develop language for this, and there really clear specifications in the CLG manual about designations and when something can be essentially de-designated. So we did look very clearly in that situation. I like the example you brought up. It's interesting, something that we didn't really think about when I think talking about this. But if a situation like that came forward, I think we would address it as it comes forward, with the information at hand.
Although there would be no mechanism to address it, because the only two causes would be, it's fire or peril. And I would interpret peril as being something dangerous. So it's just a thought. I don't think we need to belabor it, but I advise that we consider that there is some mechanism to delist, similarly deaccessioning art from an art museum when it no longer fits the collection, or you find that there's issues with it, like it was looted art or something. That is the end of my questions.
Thank you very much for those thoughtful questions. Andrea Burke.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak, Chair Bjornberg. I wanted to add one more item to Commissioner Melblom's request, and adding just a little bit more on to what Rob Skalicki said. We did consider this actually quite a bit, but as Rob said, the CLG manual is very clear on what is allowed when it comes to removing a property from designation, and basically it's not, if we want to maintain our CLG status, and we'd like to do that. Granted, we did feel there is something in there, I think, about destruction, and given the fact that we have had this happen, as any city had, you're going to have properties that catch fire, they are demolished for multiple reasons that were not intentional, maybe intentional, and wanted to provide this clarification in there to identify. So it does give us the opportunity to say, hey, here is the process if you want, if this needs to happen, because we have about 6 properties right now that are sitting out there that are designated, but they are no longer standing. And to have a process to say, hey, if we actually want to take this off, this is how it's done. But we were very, very intentional to not give greater roads for this because of our CLG status, and because of the potential for it to maybe take another life of its own. Thank you.
Thank you. Do other commissioners have questions or comments that they would like to share? I don't know if we talked about this previously, but has there been any conversation about adding qualifications to the planning director position within the ordinance?
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg. That is something I think we brought up, and ultimately we decided that it has never been included, and that type of requirement or professional qualification would be something that occurs outside of the ordinance. So there are a lot of items in the text that are being moved to administrative procedures. So I think that's one of them that as a team, as a planning team, we didn't feel like it rose to the level of something that should be included there, especially when I don't believe the CLG manual requires that to be qualification for the planning director. But it is another thing that we discussed, and ultimately that's kind of the direction we went with, just to leave it out as exists.
I will say it makes me very nervous because it feels like there's a lot of onus that is now going to the planning director to make a lot of decisions and then not necessarily have to report to other staff or just has to report back to HPC. And while I would love to believe that there's like a good faith effort in always hiring people who are qualified for it, it feels like it would not be a bad thing to have included in here some type of qualifications to make sure that somebody who is in charge of making a lot of preservation decisions has some experience or understanding in that. Andrea Burke.
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg. I guess just to add a little bit more about the thought process and the reasoning for why there was a very early draft too that did have this in there, but it was taken out very early with the direction that it is not, we didn't want to limit who can do what under the ordinance. Given largely behind, there are other sections of code that don't have it very specific, that like maybe a master's degree in urban planning to make such decisions. And you likely know this, but as the way it's written in and the authority is delegated in the ordinance, the planning director is essentially staff. And I think you know that, but it was advised to not exclude individuals based on training, I think, experience and education. I'm not sure if I have that exactly right, in ordinance text to be able to open it up and have folks with different backgrounds being able to do it. But also in that is how, the other sections of code are put together, but, have noted your concerns with it. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Thomas?
This is a different question, so are you? Okay. I just wanted to ask about the demolition mitigation plans. Just state that they may include documentation of the property, historic research, et cetera. Has there been any thought into making part of that mitigation for a designated property be deconstruction to save or salvage some of the materials that are in that property?
Chair Bjornberg, Commissioner Thomas, thank you for bringing that up. I know kind of discussions about deconstruction and the idea and possibly finding a route within the ordinance really go back, for the past 5 years or so within the HPC. So it's something that has been brought up before. Staff generally have a similar response when it comes forward, is that, as a mitigation option, it is very difficult to regulate, and a lot of times, while well-meaning in mitigation, it really doesn't accomplish what it's set out to do. So in some situations, you might have property owners, saving materials, and then that becoming a burden, and then them, those materials being placed in storage and ultimately deteriorating, at that point anyway. So I guess to address your question, it's something that's been brought up in the past. It's not something that we we're considering to add to the ordinance draft as exists, but I know that in the past the HBC has talked about a similar tool like that. But just to reiterate, it's very difficult to regulate that type of mitigation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? Thoughts on the proposed application names? Commissioner Maston?
I like the names. I think they're kind of simple and explanatory for what they are versus, just kind of referring to them as CNC or COA. It's a preservation application, so I'm in favor.
Thank you. Other thoughts from commissioners on the name change? I definitely agree that it's better than 1 and 2. Questions? Comments? It's going to be my last round. Do you feel like you have enough feedback on this?
Chair Bloomberg, I think so. It's whatever you as commissioners would like to relay to staff. We're very happy to take any comments, but yeah, I think just to understand too, this is as we know, the last opportunity you really have to give comments before it would come back to you for adoption. So if there's anything maybe you're even uncertain about, I think now is kind of the final time that you should plan to raise those concerns or ask those questions if you have them.
Thank you for that clarification. Andrea Burke?
Chair Bjornberg, I just wanted to note, we did print out Commissioner Rodriguez's question and comment, if you would be so kind as to read that, so it could be shared on the record. Thank you.
Would you like me to read the whole thing, or just the?
I think, Chair Bjornberg, I think just the question that she posed, or comment that she posed.
Okay. Commissioner Rodriguez says, I have one procedural question about the updated certificate preservation applications. Is there a reason the new regulations remove the required findings section 599.420 in current regulations for what would now be administrative preservation applications? I'd imagine administrative documents and process guides that staff produce, as mentioned in the memorandum, will be very illuminating, but it is useful to have further detail within the regulations as well.
Thank you for reading that, Chair Bjornberg. And I think staff, this kind of ties back to staff in the new draft, reducing the amount of findings within an administrative preservation and a commission preservation application review. And that was really one of the things that we wanted to do initially. It was kind of one of our wish list items for a handful of reasons, and I think you as commissioners may kind of see this too as well in the staff reports you receive and the applications we receive from applicants. For example, the first finding in a certificate of appropriateness that the alteration is compatible with the designation of the landmark or historic district, including the criterion period of significance. Staff really kind of have a stock answer almost for that response every time, because what's really being asked of there is how is the historic integrity being affected, and that is finding number 2. So there are certain items that I think they're just kind of a lot of words in these findings that might be more difficult for, applicants to really address if they're 5 findings instead of 3. It is something too that, we understand that applicants come to us submitting applications from a wide variety of professional backgrounds, and we want to try to make it as clear and easy for them to address those findings, because those are required for public hearing applications, especially for an applicant to really clearly address those findings in order for us to be able to even deem their application complete. So I think if I'm interpreting Commissioner Rodriguez's question correctly, it is more so trying to be more clear and trying to, allow applicants the ability to maybe better understand and also better address what's really being looked at and the intent of the preservation ordinance in itself within those 3 findings.
Thank you. Okay, I have one other last question. Can you walk through the process again? And so the next step, we'll see this again once it's like ready for approval, and at that point it gets public comments.
Chair Bjornberg, that's correct based on our current schedule. It's always possible something could come up and we would want to bring it back to you for comments again. I would say it's probably pretty unlikely. But as I mentioned earlier, the schedule for a public hearing is not set yet. But with that being said, the next step after this is that, our team will get together and internally kind of review all the comments we received, see where we're planning to make changes based off of that. And then following that, we will send it to the clerk's office, and they will be the ones, making sure the formatting looks correct, sending back any concerns or comments that they have. And once we get it back from the clerks and we kind of have the okay there, then it would get noticed for a public hearing at the Heritage Preservation Commission. And that's where the preservation ordinance allows for the HPC to be the ones voting on the adoption. Whereas I think zoning code, requires council to do it, even though, council holds the public hearing, I believe, in zoning ordinance is what I should say. HPC holds the public hearing for changes to the preservation ordinance. So it will come back to HPC for that hearing. Yes, we will have any, public comments at that point. Any members of the public could show up and speak. But HPC's vote then does go through the council process. So it's my understanding that it just wouldn't have a public hearing at later time. So HPC would probably be the final public hearing for its adoption.
Thank you. And one other question. Sorry, I see you, Commissioner Melbaum. Has there been a public comment period, or has this been open to the public previously?
Chair Bjornberg, so it has been open to the public in a way that, the document has been public since we published the first draft in October. So, we have received just a handful of comments from, more so stakeholders in the field of historic preservation. At one point, we did send the draft out to a lot of different stakeholders in the field, and we got a handful of comments back from that. But as far as like a formal kind of outreach period, that's not something that we've incorporated into this this change.
Commissioner Melbaum? Just kidding. Never mind. Oh, I'm glad. Any other final questions or comments? Okay, thank you. That concludes our discussion item. Do staff have any announcements? Andrea Burke.
Thank you, Chair Bjornberg. Yes, I have a few announcements. Thank you to everybody who came to the Preservation Awards last Thursday. It again was a lovely event, and many thanks to Rob for being our team representative that goes into planning that event, and then also you, Chair Bjornberg, who is also our commission rep that goes into planning that event. Very much appreciate all your time going into helping put that together. Our next meeting of the African American Heritage Work Group is this coming a week from today, Tuesday, March 25th. That will be, I think meetings are generally held monthly now until the work group ends, which would be roughly around June. But just like to give notice to that. That is open to the public. If you are signed up for the Gov Delivery, you'll get notices about that. We have begun planning for the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions Conference, which will be held, Forum Conference, which will be held here in July of 2026. We just had our first kickoff meeting with the Planning Committee, and will very much be looking for more volunteer help as this ramps up. It will be a very large event, but no directions on where that is needed now. I just wanted to give an update that it has started. So very excited though. And then also a early heads up that the next HPC retreat is happening May 15th. And so I will be sending out I guess it's still March, that's 2 months away, but as it gets into early April, I will send out my usual request for topics to be discussed at that meeting, and I can work them in. But that concludes my announcements. Thank you.
Thank you. Do commissioners have any announcements? Commissioner Alexander.
Oh, I don't have an announcement. I just wanted clarification on what the retreat is.
Yes, of course, Chair Bjornberg and Commissioner Alexander. The retreat is, we have 2 of them on the calendar per year, and it is a public meeting, but it is not one where we hear business. It is more of an informal discussion between staff and the commission that we discuss topics relative to historic preservation, to staff initiatives, to initiatives at the city. I often have been sending out a request for topics about 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks in advance, from commissioners if they have a particular topic they would like to discuss. We'll often give updates on some of the big projects we have been working on, what some of staffing or other new initiatives that are happening kind of on the staff side. But it is a chance for us to talk while public in a more informal setting and have a conversation where we are not using Robert's rules, and bring each other up to speed on items. So thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. With that, we have completed all items on the agenda for this meeting, and there being no other business to come before it, and without objection, I'll declare this meeting adjourned. The next regular meeting of the HPC is April 8th, 2025.